started. We can just finish up getting your breakfast, but we want to get started because there's lots of good information to come. Last week we had Robin Smart from the Alzheimer Society. She's the education coordinator, public education coordinator from there. She was excellent. As you can see, we got many people back today.
I paid them to come back.
For those who who weren't here last year, Robin is an alumni from the University of Guelph. She's with the Alzheimer Society of Guelph, Wellington since 2005. And so we're going to go ahead today. Now last week, if you missed it, it is online. If you Google Dementia and University, I think you'll get it up, but it will be on our site soon under HR News. So we're videotaping today as well. And then we've added on, by popular demand, another one, November 26th. And that's the poster that we have here, and it's on
communication.
Yes, more than words. I love that. More than words. So that one is at the UC, so then we won't have to worry about numbers. And so that's at the UC. So please take it and post it in your kitchen. And now I'll hand it over to Robin. Thank you, Robin.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. Nice to see the sunshine. Nice to see you all today. I'd like to invite you to just take a moment, look at the screen, and tell me what you saw. What was up there? Mixed up words. Did any of you get a count on how many words were there? Did any of you know what the words were saying? Yeah, it had the word world in it. Yeah, something. And I think something about. That's a great way to start. Something about. I certainly do not want to give you dementia. I really, really don't. But what I was trying to do was give you a tiny momentary fragment of what it might be like when you have dementia. Because when somebody has a dementia, no matter what kind they have, they spend their days trying to figure stuff out. Everything is an exercise in figuring stuff out. Figuring out, what do the words mean? Something about is kind of how they go through life. Something about, but they don't have the clarity necessarily. So if I had given you enough time, and now I'm going to give you the handouts, I'm going to invite you to just take one and pass them around, please. If I had given you enough time, this sentence is what those words would have created, and you would have figured it out. Obviously, our brain determines how we experience the world around us. That's common sense. Why would I even bother writing it up there? The piece that sometimes is missing for people is the recognition that it is only our brain that determines how we experience the world around us. Basically, our bodies are just big coach bags for carrying our brains around. The brain is the piece that interprets all our senses, puts it all together for us. So if we have a disease that affects our brain, then unfortunately we really are affected in every sense of the word. Just in case folks were away, real quick review from last week about what is dementia. And it is a set of symptoms that accompany a disease. It's a change in your level of function and ability. If you have a disease that affects your brain, and we're going to literally look at some brain slides today to see how that happens, the changes are differences in your memory ability, your language, your judgment, your reasoning, your ability to perform daily tasks, and changes in personality and behavior, all of which worsen over time. Instead of saying that run-on sentence, we say dementia, and it means all of that. There are a number of different types of dementia. So dementia is kind of like an umbrella term, hence the picture of the big red umbrella. It's an overarching term that assumes all those changes, but what's under the umbrella of dementia? Alzheimer's disease. It's the most common type of dementia. It's just one type of dementia. You could have Lewy body disease. That's the type of dementia that looks like a cross between Parkinson's and Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's affects more women than men. Lewy body affects more men than women. With Alzheimer's, The dementia journey can last anywhere from 2 to 20 years. The average is 10. With Lewy body, it's a little shorter. Your average is about 5 to 7 years. You could have something called frontotemporal dementias. There's a number of them. PICS is the most common. Those are dementias that start in the front and temporal lobes of the brain, and usually memory loss isn't one of the first signs. Usually behavior changes come first, and the FTDs, the PICS disease and others, tend to strike younger, people in their 50s and 60s. So you aren't thinking dementia when you go off to the doctor and somebody's complaining, boy, they're not nice anymore. They think of other things and not dementia initially. Vascular dementia, associated obviously with stroke or TIAs, transient ischemic attacks. So what happens in vascular dementia, often your gait and balance is affected early, your continence is affected, your language can be affected, certainly emotions. But then it's different because it depends on where the infarct or the little stroke happened in your brain. So it looks a little different. Mixed, as if one isn't bad enough, you can have more than one type at a time. So mixed often refers to Alzheimer's disease and vascular, but you can have mixes of dementia. Doesn't matter what type of dementia somebody has, even though it says Alzheimer's Society on my tag, which I put in my other side, even though it says Alzheimer's Society on our tags, we are the go-to place. Any questions about dementia, we're the go-to place. What is important to know is that they consider some dementias reversible. Sometimes they're called pseudo-dementias. These are situations where people look like they have the early stages of dementia. They're confused, they can't focus, they struggle to manage things. There's a lot of problems, but it can be caused not by Alzheimer's disease or PICS disease. It can be caused by undiagnosed depression, undiagnosed thyroid disease, undiagnosed diabetes. It could be an interaction of medications or a toxic buildup of medications. It can be dehydration, poor nutrition. It can be brain tumors. It can be normal pressure hydrocephalus. There are numerous other situations that can make you look like you have dementia. So if you're worried about somebody, I encourage you strongly to go get it checked out, because these are basically treatable situations. These are more acute situations where maybe we can do something to reverse the situation. If, though, you have dementia, what happens is you come to a place as the disease progresses where you have a lot of trouble recognizing and managing your environment. The kinds of questions in the little yellow bubbles up there on the screen, where am I? Why can't I go home? Where's my family? Who are these strangers? Why is that lady trying to take my clothes off? Those are the kinds of things that are in the heads of people with dementia because they're having trouble with all of these functional areas. And so what we sometimes see is a negative reaction to help that we're trying to give somebody because they're not seeing the world the same way we are. And I want to show you why. Obviously, here on the far side is a healthy brain. And literally, it looks kind of juicy and plump, doesn't it? And on this side, we have a brain where somebody has Alzheimer's disease. I'm going to show you what's going on in the brain in the next slide, but the result is that brain cells literally get sick, they die, they shrink away. And what you're seeing here is the shrinkage. We call it atrophy. Notice that it's not so thick and juicy and plump. There are huge gaps and spaces. What you have is a situation where people can lose up to a quarter, 25% of the capacity of their brain due to this shrinkage. So no wonder they're not managing the same way they used to manage. So here are some pictures for you. This is a picture of a beta amyloid plaque under an electron microscope. That little goldy brown blob in the middle is actually not a good thing at all. We all have beta amyloid in our brains. We all need a little. But when people have dementia, they tend to have too much beta amyloid. So beta amyloid is a protein, and it gets misprocessed. It gets snipped off too soon, and that leaves little filaments of this protein floating around in the brain. These filaments are very toxic and they're very sticky. So there they are, busily floating around in the brain, and as you probably are aware, your brain cells don't butt up against each other. There's lots of gaps in between them. Brain cells almost look like trees, upside down trees. They have these branches called dendrites that come off the ends of them. So there's lots of space in between the brain cells or the neurons for these little filaments to float around. And when they float into each other, because they're sticky, they clump together, and the more they float and bump into each other, the bigger the plaques get. They're insoluble, and while they're getting big and floating in between the brain cells, they're disrupting the communication. They make it very challenging for the electronic impulse, which is the message, to go from one brain cell across the synaptic cleft into the next brain cell. So they're gumming up the works in between the brain cells. The picture in black and white over here, that's a picture of a neurofibrillary tangle. Those are big terms. You don't need to know any of the terms. They're just tongue twisters. Our cells in our brain, our cells are maintained through a protein called tau. And tau is designed to maintain the structure of the cell and deliver nutrients. And when you have dementia, the tau protein also misprocesses. So instead of staying in a straight line like railroad tracks, it's as if the ties on the railway tracks have been removed, so those straight lines bend and twist and come out of shape, and they get all tangled up. I always think of a kitten with a ball of wool. It's just a tangled mess. You can see we don't have straight lines anywhere for the delivery of the systems. So that's going on inside the brain cell. So that's where the cells are sickening, dying, and shrinking away. In all cases, there's some inflammation occurring because, of course, the brain's trying to fight what's going on. So that's the picture that we can't see. We don't look at somebody and peer in their forehead and see that that's happening in their brain, but that's why we see the changes in function that we call dementia. So this is a MRI CT scan, and I want to draw your attention to three things. These are the healthy brains. These are the brains with dementia. Three things to note. You'll see that the healthy brain comes quite close to the edge of the skull. That's your brain inside. The white heavy line is your skull. Basically, the healthy brain comes right out, fills up your head, comes right out to the edge of the skull. With somebody with dementia, look at the gap. Look at how it has shrunk away. There is a real decrease in amount of volume there. Second thing, I want you to look at the density of the brain. So you have quite thick, distinct white areas. That's what you want. When you're looking at a brain with dementia, you can see how shadowy it is in comparison, as if it were literally fading away, right? And the third thing to note, we're going to look at the ventricles. Now, we all have little tiny hollow spaces in our brains called ventricles. Here they are. There's a number of them. They're filled with cerebral spinal fluid. That centerpiece that looks like a butterfly, that's a ventricle. In the brain with dementia, look how large the ventricles are. See, they're much, much larger. Oops. Basically, what that slide is showing you is that the brain is shrinking from the outside in, from the inside out, and losing its density. So that's what's going on, and nobody sees it. If you line people with early stage dementia up in a room and you bring in a bunch of people who are considered healthy, you can't just point at somebody and see that and say, you have dementia and you don't. And so it's a real challenge because people will say, I'm struggling with something, and they get dismissed. You look fine. You look fine. People hear that all the time, and I hear how frustrated they are. So here are some different views. This is a different view to show you that shrinkage I was talking about, the atrophy of the brain. I had somebody ask me, is that a child's brain? Nope. Adult brain, healthy brain, brain with dementia. That just shows you in proportion. The reason that the next series or the next lecture we're going to do in this series is on communication has to do with the hit that the talking center takes. Obviously, we have the healthy brain above. We have the brain with Alzheimer's disease below. Look at the difference. No wonder the language skills are so impaired. That's why we really need to work on communication. I'm not going to show you brain slides forever, I promise. We're getting near the end. On the far end, you can see regions controlling hearing and understanding. So as the disease progresses, there are usually considered 3 stages, early, middle, late, and then there's the very end of life. And you see the difference as it goes. These areas for hearing and understanding are quite dramatically affected. So if you don't hear properly, you aren't able to interpret, you aren't able to understand the memory center. This little half circle piece, that's your hippocampus area. Anything that we see, whether we see it visually or we're reading it, anything we see or we hear needs to go through the hippocampus to go into the cortex to go into long-term storage. When the hippocampus is basically missing in action, you have terrible issues with learning new information, retaining information, short-term memory. I sometimes describe the disease as taking the hippocampus and thinking of it as a rusty gate. Initially, you can sometimes shove that gate open and get the information through, but eventually that gate just literally rusts shut. People say, why don't you oil the hinges? What if we could? Occasionally, something with huge emotional significance will act like oil on the hinges. It's called emotional mediation, because every memory we lay down, even if it's moving a piece of paper, any memory we have is laid down with a layer of emotion to it, whether we realize it or not. So sometimes, not always, emotion will let things through, only sometimes. And then the temper and personality region. Just dramatic difference. You don't need me to say anything about that. All right. I know, why would I show you pictures inside somebody's head when you've just eaten breakfast? But so what I want to talk about for just a couple of minutes are the lobes of the brain and what they do for us and what they do for people. So the first lobe we're looking at is the temporal lobe, as you can see. And the temporal lobes are located on either side of our head, in front of our ears. And the most important role is that of memory. It's the memory center in the brain. So if you have damage in your temporal lobes, you're going to have trouble with language related to remembering words and how to use words. People will forget what has been said or heard. The person usually repeats things a lot, asks questions repeatedly. That can be quite distressing for both parties. The person starts to lose vocabularies and the ability to understand or comprehend. They can't process words, they can't identify things, they can't name objects, that sort of thing. They'll have difficulties learning new information and adjusting to new situations. Change can be really hard on any person, but particularly difficult for people with dementia. If a person moves to a new home or a new long-term care facility, they'll have trouble orienting themselves. I worked with a family yesterday. The husband bought a new stove. The wife is ready to have Goodwill come and take it away because she can't manipulate the new stove. It's a modern stove. It's all push button. It's all new. It's like, yeah, this was actually not a cool thing. You obviously didn't talk to us before you invested in that piece of equipment. And eventually your long-term memory is affected as well. And so people often think that they're in a different location. They don't retain the new location, they think they're in an older location. And you lose the ability to do familiar things, like use the stove. Can't use the new stove, could only manage the old stove. Maybe you can't manipulate tools anymore or something you used to manipulate. So those are the kinds of things that are associated with your temporal lobe. Your frontal lobe, it's certainly the largest part of the brain. If you were to take the line on your wrist, put it over your eyebrow, and wrap your hands back on both sides, that's how big the temporal lobe region is. Obviously, it is the CEO of the brain. And so it's the executive management center. It's the initiation center, the get it going center. And it's our adult behavior center. So if you have damage to your front lobe, all those social norms that were instilled when you were a child can be lost. You lose the ability to plan. You can't organize. If you can't organize yourself, it's really hard to get dressed. You don't know what pieces you need and what order to put them on and how to put them on. That's a challenge. You can't figure out how to get somewhere. You can't accomplish things. The ability to initiate is often lost, and people look like they're actually disinterested. Even previously enjoyed activities, they just don't seem to participate. They're often unable to start something, and equally often they're unable to stop. If they do get started doing something, then they have trouble transitioning to stopping that. So if you get somebody who has been doing a motion, maybe they've been drying the dishes, and so there's sort of been this circular motion going, then when they take the towel, they'll probably use that same towel and just maybe they'll start wiping the windows or start wiping the walls, or that same motion. They can't stop even though there are no more dishes in the dish rack. They're going to keep that motion going. They call that perseveration, just if you're interested. So the front lobe regulates your behavior. I call it the filter center. When your filters are missing, you might say or do anything without any appreciation of how it makes somebody feel, whether it's rude or unkind. It also means that you don't have the protection. Those filters aren't there to keep incoming stimuli from overwhelming you. So if your front lobe is damaged, you're really in a fair amount of trouble. There we go. Your parietal lobe. Okay, so top and center of the head. Logic and analytic thinking. I say to people, let go of being right. There's no point arguing with somebody if their logic center has been knocked out. It is a loser's game. I suggest you don't go there. It's also responsible for how we use our words. What order do we put the words in? How can we form sentences? People will have a lot of trouble in their language, and they often stop understanding what people are saying to them, so that their language becomes very vague. Lots of generalizations, just a word here, a word there, very vague language. And this center affects writing. Now when your parietal center is damaged, your writing ability is affected at all. It's also responsible for the ability to use numbers. So when you think of a day, how often do you use numbers in a day? What are some of the things? Fill up my hands. What are some, tell me things that we do with numbers. Phone, date, time, money, baking, did you say? Yep, absolutely, if you can't measure. What else do we do with numbers?
Cooking.
Cooking, for sure. Almost every time, yep. You have to be able to manipulate measurement. Numbers has to do with measurement as well. So if you want to do a skill or a hobby or build something or create something, you need to be able to measure. Numbers are in most of our equipment. If you want to run the microwave or the remote control or that newfangled oven that has just been purchased, you have to be able to do numbers. In here, there are 2 analog clocks on the walls. If you have dementia, you probably lose the ability to read an analog clock. People with dementia can manage digital clocks much longer because you just say it out. This is a calculation of numbers. And you have to understand fractions. You have to be able to do quarter past, quarter to, that sort of thing. So numbers get hit when the parietal lobe is affected. It's also spatial perception. How close am I to something? How far away am I? What do I have to do? How high do I have to lift my foot to get it on the step or on the curb? When I go to sit, if I don't sit right, I either stop sitting too soon and plop onto my chair, or I meet it too soon, or I miss it completely if I don't know where I am in space. And you lose the ability to do things in sequence, so you don't know what order your clothes go on in. You don't know that the coffee goes in the filter basket and the filter basket goes in the coffee maker, what order things have to happen. Also, one thing about the parietal lobe, and I think this is kind of one thing that families struggle with particularly, is people have trouble recognizing sensory information, and they have trouble recognizing people. So they lose that ability. Your occipital lobe, right at the back, so there's the recognition center. They'll have trouble focusing or tracking objects. This gets really affected when you want to watch television. Who doesn't watch television anymore? Just about everybody has a television or access to a TV. But what happens is it makes the TV look as if it is two-dimensional instead of three-dimensional. So it appears like it is happening directly in the room with you. There's no recognition that this is separate from you. It is, if you have dementia, something that appears to be occurring right in your living room in your life, becomes quite two-dimensional. Very, very hard to track or show. It also, because of the sequencing piece, makes it a real challenge to follow a plot line. And if you watch TV, unless you PVR it, you're subjected to all the commercials. So if you're trying to follow something and you have memory impairment and you don't do sequencing and you have trouble with language, and then all of a sudden there's 6 little mini shows, which are commercials in between, and then you try to go back to where you were, very, very hard for people to follow TV. Cerebellum and brainstem right at the back. Eventually what happens is the disease starts midbrain, goes forward, and then goes back until it's global, and it will come to the brainstem at the back of the brain eventually. And so people will have trouble with their involuntary systems. They'll have trouble with swallowing, eventually things like the functions of the organs and the lungs to automatically breathe for them gets affected. And your limbic system, this is the piece that connects emotions. They often call this the emotional center of the brain. And I think I mentioned last time that people, of course, retain the ability to feel emotion but lose the control over that. It becomes damaged, so they don't have the volume button on those emotions. So their emotions are extreme and can change rapidly. People can also appear very blunted, very flat affect, not really engaged in what can happen. And it affects your daily functions, so night and day get mixed up. That's a challenge for caregivers. So I did mention that the emotions are intact. I just said that. I like the quote from Maya Angelou. I'm sure you've heard it before, but it's worth hearing one more time, because this is sort of the golden rule for interacting with people who have dementia. People will forget what you said, they'll forget what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. And that is particularly true for people with dementia. So what's normal versus abnormal forgetfulness? It's certainly normal to recognize people and places, struggle to come up with names. That's pretty common. It's normal to be able to know what day of the week it is. Once you get up and you figure out that it's morning and that it's Tuesday, you should be able to hold that all day. It's perfectly reasonable to forget details of an event, but not necessarily the event itself. And people normally will forget items but can be re-cued or will remember them later. Oh, I meant to, pick up milk on the way home. Dang, I forgot. That's pretty normal. It's when you don't re-cue yourself or cannot recall items that there's a problem. So these are the symptoms, just quickly, that say, you know what, my brain is not functioning the way it should anymore. And it's memory loss that impairs your daily function. It is that matter of degree. Trouble with familiar tasks, trouble with language, disorientation, getting lost in familiar places, poor or decreased judgment. I'm not saying you'll never make a mistake again, but things that are really out of character. Problems with abstract thinking. That's where you don't recognize numbers, birthdays, anniversaries, that sort of thing. Misplacing things in odd, strange, bizarre places. Changes in mood and behavior that seem to come out of nowhere. Changes in personality, tendencies more towards maybe some agitation, paranoia, upset, and that's due to the changes in brain chemicals. I got no slides on brain chemicals. We can't show you those, but that happens. And then that loss of initiative, the apathy. So what happens is people are usually sitting there going, okay, so I don't want any of that in my life. How do I avoid it? And this is the part where we talk about how you can protect your brain and keep your brain as healthy as possible. Reducing your risk is really the best thing that anybody knows for dementia. Worldwide, the focus is no longer on assuming we're going to have a cure in the next X number of years, but the focus on trying to reduce the risk. If we were able to stave off or delay the onset of dementia by just 5 years, we would cut the number of cases in half. 50% of the cases would be gone. So this might seem pretty common sense to you, but this could be important in your life or somebody else's life, what we're going to suggest for helping to reduce your risk. Basically, your brain is a self-regulating, self-repairing organ. And the school of thought is that the stronger your brain can be, the longer it can maintain those functions. It's when it is overwhelmed with too many assaults that it can't keep up, and the dementia occurs. So, it's never too late. It's never too soon, but it's never too late. Don't assume that if you haven't lived a good, clean lifestyle that you're doomed. Not necessarily so at all. It's always possible to either maintain or improve your brain health, and that's going to help reduce your risk for sure. There are no guarantees in life. I don't give guarantees to anybody about anything, but this is what the scientists say. Now, there are 3 things we can't do anything about: age, gender, and genetics. You can lie about your age, you can say whatever you want, but your body knows how old you are. If you haven't switched your gender by now, you're probably not going to do anything about it. So the genetics, what your parents gave you, your parents gave you. Again, we have no control over those particular factors. So age is the biggest risk factor for dementia. It trumps family history. Age is your number 1 risk factor. And most people do not develop dementia until later in life. There certainly are cases, they refer to it as younger onset dementia. And if you had Alzheimer's under the age of 65, then you would be considered a younger onset case. But in Canada, there are 750,000 people over the age of 65 with Alzheimer's, and only 71,000 under the age of 65. Now that's pretty miserable for those 71,000, but if you're just comparing numbers, you can see that it's more of a senior thing. Unfortunately, when it comes to Alzheimer's, as I mentioned, more women have dementia than men. 72% of the cases of Alzheimer's disease are females. Why, you ask? Why? I'm asking that myself, being a female. There is no definitive answer. They're investigating whether it has something to do with the change of hormones after menopause, possibly, but there is no definitive answer to that. And genetics. Genetics only play a teeny tiny part. There is a disease, FAD, familial autosomal dominant Alzheimer's disease. It's very, very rare, very small number of cases worldwide. And it's an inheritable form of the disease. It strikes very early. It usually strikes people in their 40s. And it's about a 50-50 chance of your children having that. But the majority of the cases truly do not have a genetic link. You can have genes that might increase your risk, but that doesn't mean you're going to get it. I know lots of situations. Both parents have AD, the child doesn't. Neither parent has Alzheimer's, the child does. So there's no guarantee in one direction. It only increases your risk a little bit. If you have a family member with Alzheimer's, a direct relative, that means either a parent or a sibling. Grandparents don't count genetically speaking here. So if you have a parent or a sibling with Alzheimer's, your risk is only increased by 5%. If you have two parents with Alzheimer's, or two relatives, your risk is only increased 15%. When we're talking about age, after age 65, the risk, every 5 years, the risk doubles. So definitely age is a bigger risk. But there's stuff you can control. And these are the things that we really need to pay attention to. Hypertension, just a big word for blood pressure. Diabetes, high cholesterol, smoking. If you do, please don't. There's lots of services that will help you, lots of opportunities. Same with the alcoholism, you know, get some help there. There's a particular dementia associated with alcoholism. Has anybody heard of Korsakoff syndrome or Wernicke-Korsakoff? Nope. Well, I hope you never do. I hope you never need to know that term, but it is the particular dementia associated with alcoholism. Mental inactivity. So yay you coming out early in the morning to a lecture, and yay you when you do anything that stimulates your brain. Ooh, physical inactivity. As I said last time, don't get up and start exercising now, but you know, walk across campus a couple times today while the sun is out. Go see how Brandon Plaza is coming along. Brain inflammation, diet and weight, and stress. And these are things that we can control. If we control these issues, we can really reduce our risk for vascular dementia. Those are the tiny little strokes that occur. So there are 6 keys to brain health. Physical activity is certainly the #1 key to brain health. And I believe that, which is why I get up every morning and go do something, and often in the evening, if I am not lecturing, I will go to the gym or go to an aquafit class or do something. Physical activity is key. It will reduce your risk, it will increase your brain power, it'll make you look better physically, but it's definitely really, really important. Things that are good for your heart diet-wise. You want to increase your ability to take in fruits, vegetables, actually vegetables #1, fruits #2, whole grain products, things that are steeped in omega-3. We're going to talk a bit about that in a minute when I take you through one of the handouts that I've given you. So if it's good for your heart, it's usually good for your brain. Your activity level, they've done this with animals and with people. Basically, what you want to do is get out there, because when you exercise, you release BDFN, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. What that really means is that you are doing something that will allow you to learn better, that will stimulate your memory, and that will increase synaptic connections. So you want to get out there and exercise. Obviously, if you have any conditions, check with your doctor first. Start slowly. Don't be a weekend warrior. I think that's actually worse than anything. People go out and they say, okay, I haven't exercised all week. I'm going to take Saturday and I am going to do thus and thus and thus. By Sunday, they're practically crippled and they go, okay, exercise is not for me, and they just give up. So you want to find some balance. Eating foods that contain antioxidants. Thank you for the fruit this morning. Thank you for the berries this morning. That's wonderful. Just like we see apples turn brown when they're split and left open in the air, or you see tarnish develop on silver, that's oxidization. And that happens to our cells inside our bodies if we don't have antioxidants to take care of that. So you want to make sure that those leafy green and deep colored vegetables are being consumed. Where do you find antioxidants? Well, here are a few suggestions for you. Vitamin C and E, very good, best in combination, they say. I suggest that you don't run out and start taking a bunch of supplements. People heard a few years ago that vitamin C and E were really good for you, and it's true. So they started taking massive doses of C and E and did more harm to themselves than good. You want to make sure that you have a balanced approach. And if you take your antioxidants and flavonoids through your food instead of out of a supplement bottle, you're getting the good of those antioxidants and flavonoids. You're getting an interactive synergy that is better for you than single supplements. And you're getting all the things that science hasn't yet found a way to take out and put in a bottle. So it's way better to get your bonuses through your diet than through supplements. Psyllium, there are traces in different foods. Your fatty acids, they really recommend the omega-3 more than the others. We're having salmon tomorrow night. Yes, I make sure we have salmon once a week and other things. So here are some suggestions. Things that actually aren't so bad to eat. Red and yellow peppers, carrots, tomatoes, spinach, peaches. When you look at the list, it's colorful. Really, if you want to take it to heart, all you have to think about is eat a rainbow. You want to eat from all the color groups. You really do want to eat a rainbow as you go. People love the flavonoids. Oh, red wine, beer, dark chocolate. I am not here to tell you to take up drinking. If you don't already drink that stuff, don't start. There are other ways to get it. But there can be a little fun. The dark chocolate, an ounce, like a little portion a day, but a little a day, not a bad thing at all. Flaxseed, soybean oil, walnut oil, sesame seeds, avocados. Swap your oils out. Make sure you're only using olive oil and canola oil. Or get maybe walnut oil for your salad dressing, something exotic that way. Sesame seed oil. Got a great recipe. You marinate asparagus with ginger and sesame seed oil. It's wonderful. Grill it up. You can make delicious things that are nutritious for you. Homocysteine. I don't know if you've ever heard that term before. People with high levels of this particular amino acid in their system are more likely to have Alzheimer's disease, and they're much more likely to have heart issues. There's definitely a correlation between heart issues and dementia. And so it's the normal product of metabolism, but what you need to do to make sure you don't have too much is you want to make sure you have your B6 and B12 and your folic acid. And that brings us right back to Mama was right, eat your vegetables. Greens on your plate, that's what you really want to make sure. Alcohol abuse, I mentioned it earlier. There's lots of things that unfortunately can be damaging to you. Here's where life isn't fair yet again. They suggest that because men and women metabolize alcohol differently, men can have 2 drinks a day and women can have 1. Bummer, eh? They're suggesting maybe red wine, not whiskey. Street drug use, that was in there because sometimes I talk to the teens. Obviously, you don't want to do. Why they call it recreational drugs, I will never know. But it is not recreation for your brain. We're probably all the same age, so we might remember that ad. Do you remember an ad on TV where they had a frying pan and they cracked the egg into the frying pan? And the egg was your brain, and the fried egg was your brain on drugs. Any of you my age remember that? Yeah. It was a pretty accurate summary. Stress. Here again is something that we can manage to a degree. We cannot eliminate stress from our lives. We cannot eliminate stressful news and stressful situations. What we can do is decide how we're going to react and what we're going to do to help ourselves de-stress. What happens when we are under stress is that we get an immediate response. This is from the days of cavemen, from when we were first evolving, and it floods adrenaline into your body, and it sends cortisol into your body. And cortisol can stay in your body for up to 72 hours after the initial flood. And cortisol will age you faster than anything else. So you don't want to be continually flooded with cortisol. So the things to think about are, can I eliminate the stress? Sometimes you can. Sometimes, you know, it's something you can either avoid or get rid of or decide you want to cut it out of your life. Sometimes you can't. Sometimes you're married to the stress. Sometimes you have inherited the stress. Sometimes it's your job. There are many ways where we can't necessarily avoid the stress. But if not, can we change our thoughts and reactions to that? Can we choose to act instead of react? Can we reframe it or look at it in a different way? Is there a way to teach ourselves to be mindful and not spin off in the direction of what if and project into the future and think of all the possible bad scenarios? If I've had a stressful day, I know that there are certain things I like to do when I go home. Think about, what do you do to be good to yourself to decrease your stress? Because it's not selfish to take a little time to go for a walk, go in the garden, have a warm bath, do what you need to do to de-stress. That's actually not selfish at all. Drink a little wine, your 1 glass a day, make sure it's red. Cabernet Sauvignon's the best for your antioxidants, go for it. These are all fine things to do, but we want to make sure that we recognize the health benefit of it and then do it without guilt, for sure. Also, falls. Falls are huge. You might not be in too much danger of falling, but if you live or work or care for somebody who is in risk of falling, please pay attention to this slide. Obviously, you don't want to fall and get hurt. You really don't want people to fall and take a blow to the head. You've probably been following the news stories about the football players who have sued the federation because of so many blows to the head, and they're getting really bad dementia early, violent outcomes. Falls can be extremely damaging. It's the #1 admission to long-term care before it should necessarily be necessary, and it really does make a difference how many times you hit your head or how many times you are unconscious or have a concussion. So you want to be very careful about protecting your head. If you don't know what to give somebody, a senior, for Christmas and they don't have decent grab bars in the bathroom, don't go to Walmart and buy the stuck-on kind, you know, with the suction cups. Have a professional put decent grab bars in their bathroom for them. Or if they don't have banisters, look at these stairs. What's wrong with that picture? There's no banister. If you are going to have a banister installed as a gift for somebody, make sure the carpenter doing it or the person doing it knows that the banister needs to go not to an attractive conclusion a step before the end, but all the way to the wall. Because people leaning on banisters as they go, that last step, yep, they still need it, folks. So make sure it goes all the way down. Protecting your head. Certainly if anybody in your family does sports that need a helmet, I certainly recommend the proper helmets. We have a game for the kids. Sometimes I get invited to go speak to scouts or Cubs, troops like that. So we have a mix and match game where we have the sports and all the different helmets. We want to make sure they know the right helmet for the right sport and how to wear it. It really is important for whatever you're doing. And here's permission to party. This is worth waiting for, isn't it? Staying socially connected is one of the most positive things you can do for your brain. Playing games with people, going dancing with people, having a good time with somebody is vitally important to your brain. There's a huge correlation between isolation and dementia. Join a hobby, take a class, go visit, go volunteer. Yeah, this is good to do. Because every time you use your brain, particularly if you use it in a different way than you're used to, if you're doing something that isn't your norm, if you're stepping outside your comfort zone, outside your box, doing something differently, you develop new brain cells. And what you want to do, these are pictures of neurons, these are what kind of look like trees. What we want to do is we want to have as many branches or dendrites as possible coming off our neurons. You want to have a lot of new connections so that if something happens, you still have some connections in reserve. That's why they call it brain reserve. You want to build up those connections for sure. You can jog your mind by doing any number of things, but I encourage you to move on to different things. It's the different piece that makes a difference. So we have a bunch of free services. I think I mentioned them last time. We're only a phone call away, and all of our contact information is on the back of all of the handouts that I've given you today. I do want to take questions. Think of your questions, but I want to talk to you about what I brought and why I brought it. Heads up, do you mind doing the lights up again, if you'd be so kind? Heads up for healthier brains. Inside, this is a great guide for you or others. Inside is a little handout, Keeping Your Mind Sharp, that really talks to you about mindfulness, head protection, exercise. So you get some bonus material in there. Don't let that one slide out. I just thought that even though I showed you some of what goes on with dementia, it would be really helpful if you saw Dispelling the Myths. That's the flip side of the coin. I told you what is, you need to know what isn't just as much. So that's an excellent little brochure. I recommend it to you strongly. In case we had caregivers in the room today, I don't know what your circumstances are, but I brought the brochure called How to Reduce Caregiver Stress. And if you are a caregiver here today, I would pick up the brochure called Ways to Help and start handing it out to people. So this is for the caregivers. This is for the caregivers to give to others. If you want to be helpful, just read it yourself. And then last but not least, I really want to leave you with the postcard, See Me, Not My Disease. When I mentioned at the very beginning that it's hard to distinguish just by looking at somebody whether they have dementia or not, and people say, you know, I'm struggling with my memory, I'm having a problem, and people say to them, oh, I struggle with my memory, I forget things, oh, you look fine. They often feel quite dismissed and disrespected in a lot of ways. The other thing that happens is if somebody finds out they have dementia, if they convince them, yeah, I really do have dementia, then they don't get talked to anymore. Oh, you have dementia, and there's this cutoff piece. So this is a concept piece, and I would encourage you to be an advocate and take it and stick it up somewhere. Put it on a bulletin board, take it to your gym, put it on your church board. Just spread the word. People with dementia really care about all these things that are written in white at the top of the postcard. And you want to see the person, not the disease. So thank you very much, and I am happy to take any questions there might be. Okay.
I just want to, you've talked a lot about stress, and I wanted to bring attention to Kathy Sommer's courses that she offers. And I can't say enough about them. They're excellent, and it's on stress reduction. She offers a wide variety of courses.
And they're here through the university. And you can easily check that by typing in Kathy Sommer's Stress.
Yes.
And if you
SOMERS.
SOM1MERS. Okay, that's a great plug. Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Any other points somebody wants to either make or ask about? I know we're right on the button, so thank you so much for coming today. We really appreciate you being here. If you have anything you want to say, I'll stay for a few minutes and be happy to talk to you.
Thank you so much, Robin.
A pleasure.
And we have a little donation to the Alzheimer
Oh,
Society
thank you.
for
Thank you. That will be put to good use. Programs and services are free because of donations, so thank you very much.